Brendan, you're the one at Intel, right? That we met at we chatted again.
We chatted. IBM / Boxbert
Right.
acquired. I feel graced by your presence here. I'm wondering how many PRs you're opening up during the meeting.
Nothing currently. I'm poking at trust. The problem that I'm currently encountering is I'm working with Open Rewrite, and Open Rewrite doesn't have a good way of globally filtering. And the thing that I need to deal with is I don't want to generate pull requests if the change is only going to be made against I don't want to make a change if it's only going to be made against tests, right? You want to make it if it's going to be run against tests and production code. And so I'm chewing on a problem with the Modern team about trying to add a feature that lets you filter out, says, if this change is going to make a change to production code, you can also change tests. But if you're only going to change tests, don't change anything.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, once we get that figured out, we can do more pull request generation.
You're solving the good problems for us. Michael, you doing better today?
Yeah, about 70–80%. Mostly just the sinus headache now.
Yeah. Good to see you sitting down and not stuck in bed.
Yeah. Yeah. We can give it another minute or two for folks to join. So I'll just, folks who can say, feel free to add your attendance to the meeting notes here, and also if there's anything you wanted to add to the agenda, feel free to add to the agenda. My agenda item is only going to be a few minutes, just sort of, and actually it's great that we have Jonathan on, because I might have some questions, because I don't know, Jonathan, how deep you are in the Sterling toolchain conversations, but that's been coming up a lot with regards to also Fresca.
Nope.
Oh, okay, no problem. I only know, I know that actually, I know some of the folks on this call. I know Jonathan Meadows is in some of those conversations. Brian is in some of those conversations. I know we're trying to just sort of better understand like what that actually means. All right. Okay. Okay, we can probably get started here. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly after, and your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. Before getting started with any agenda items, is there anybody new to the meeting who wants to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm John from VMware. I've worked with many of the folks on this call in other supply chain related working groups and things like that. There is a proliferation of them. So super interested to learn more about this and see if there's anywhere I can help out. So
Thanks. Glad to have you. All right. All right, so we can get into it. So the only agenda item for today was so just as a reminder for some of the stuff that we're looking to get done for the upcoming year, for folks who are new or who haven't attended the last couple of meetings. One of the things is we want to kind of integrate that pipeline framework using Q. I was supposed to have actually we got a shout out, I believe, was it last week? Is that right, Brad?
Yeah, at the Q community call.
Yeah, I was supposed to have a meeting with what's his name, Paul, right? That's his name. I was supposed to have a meeting with Paul on Monday, but I had a fever, so I couldn't. So I pushed it back to Friday. But he's going to be having a meeting with him to see if there's some ways we can kind of collaborate a little bit. But there's definitely areas we need to, I'm not an expert in Q. And we would love to kind of like see if they can help us out a little bit with some of that. So that's one of the big things. Another big thing is just, which is a lot of this comes from the last meeting, is stuff like the release. What even is a release of Fresca look like? Are we talking about a Helm chart? Are we talking about some other sort of releasable thing? Are we talking about, a self-deployable set of VMs? I don't know. Like, what would something like a release of Fresca look like? So just as a reminder, those are some things that we're still trying to kind of figure out. We'll probably, I don't know. I know a lot of folks here have a lot of other priorities. So like some of these features are maybe not the number one thing. So just, but I know those are some things we're trying to kind of figure out. And that's why I'm going to reach out to the Q folks. Internally at Kusari, we're working on some potentially deployable things. And if it makes sense, we're definitely going to open source it. We're working on a few things on that front. And then cool. So that's that. So the only thing, and this is just from my end, just some follow-ups from Cloud Native SecurityCon. I was at the OpenSSF booth for a few hours, talking to folks about stuff like Salsa, about stuff like some of the various projects that we're working on the OpenSSF, as well as Fresca. And so there was some interesting things there. So just as a reminder, right, like, I don't want to say that Fresca is dead by any means, but obviously there is a lot of concern from folks about like, hey, how do I adopt Fresca when I could just adopt something, let's say GitHub Actions, or how would I move off of a Jenkins? There seemed to be increasing interest from folks around that, like, quote unquote easy button. A lot of folks are like, hey, yeah, I have a Jenkins, but thinking about how I have that Jenkins run a secure build, develop, integrate with, let's say, Scorecard, integrate with Salsa, integrate with generating an SBOM, integrate with various like SCA scans or whatever, is a nightmare managing it at a much larger scale. And so there was interesting, there was some interest at potentially something like, if, Jenkins could trigger Fresca, where Fresca just does the secure pieces of the build. There seemed to be some interest there. Or the same thing from the GitHub side, like if GitHub could trigger the secure side of the build via something like Fresca. Once again, I don't know if that's the direction we want to go, but just wanted to kind of throw some of that out there. And then there was some interesting conversations regarding the quote unquote Sterling toolchain, which for folks who aren't familiar, late last year, I believe it was in December, the governing board voted on a new direction of the OpenSSF for 2023. And that direction included this idea of trying to have an end-to-end tool chain from, let's say, development through to production, a set of tools configured in a particular way that you think could, secure the SDLC, secure the supply chain, secure, general, whatever, like just secure IT, right? I recognize that that's a very, very large ask, but there's definitely areas where I can imagine if somebody were to come in and say, well, we use VS Code plus these plugins configured these ways, and we think it's pretty reasonable. We use these CLI tools to, do whatever, and we think they're pretty reasonable and they're configured in these ways. And we use something like, let's say, Fresca for the build and configured that way, and we use this for admission control and gatekeeping into production and yada. And we think that's pretty reasonable. It's not necessarily something that could be used out of the box per se, but maybe gets folks much, much closer there, which seems to be a big open question, because a lot of folks really are not familiar with A lot of organizations are really struggling to kind of have that secure general SDLC flow, even if it's not perfect. Even just some of the basics of like, hey, how do we prevent developers from just downloading random malware off the internet, right? That sort of thing, and in ways that are not like lock everything down and then nobody gets anything done. I think that's kind of the balance that folks are trying to kind of make. And then also, some of the stuff that we're seeing already in the open source space is we are starting to see, I saw a couple of projects, I can't remember any of them off the top of my head, that are trying to do like open source SCA, whereas before we mostly saw only closed source. And so there's some folks that do seem interested in just at least showing that as, what we're calling not a, once again, it's like a demonstrative example. It's not intended to be the only example. It's not intended to be also just purely the, like it's supposed to be something that, hey, this is something that you probably can't use right out of the box, but it gets you at least most of the way there to at least get started. And then you can kind of go on from there. So there was some, before actually I move any further, any questions on that? And once again, this is my understanding of this. I know this is very, very early. I know there's some conversations between folks like Brian Bellendorf and Jonathan Meadows and some of the folks in the TAC and okay, if there's no questions on that. One of the things that Brian had brought up at Cloud Native Security Con is he thought that in the very least, what the approach that Fresca has taken, right, which is Fresca, is not just some Go code or something like that. It's not just a tool we wrote ourselves. We took a bunch of different open source tools off the shelf and then developed a bunch of configuration to help tie it all together. Now, great, like some of this glue code is, not exactly the most, it's brittle, right? It's not the most, anyway. He had brought up that he thought that was a pretty reasonable like approach to the problem. And he might look at something like Fresca, at least the approach that Fresca has taken, as a similar approach for something like the Sterling toolchain. And how do we go and sort of say like the at least in my opinion, I think the key piece here for something like the Sterling toolchain is not necessarily what tools we're using per se. It's the glue code that ties all the things together to make it easy to use, right? Because today we can all say like, okay, yeah, you should be using VS Code, these plugins, you should be using, SigStore and be signing in these ways. And you should be, you should have an emission controller that checks for these things, yada, but like actually tying it all together so that you don't constantly go, wait a second, why is it not working? Or why did this emission, policy fail? I thought I was using the right key or whatever. Making sure that all those things are tied together well is really the hard part. The thing that I had brought up to Brian, which is I think one of the big challenges within our group here, is that writing the glue code and writing, whether that glue code is stuff like Q or whether it is like we write some Go code to help tie it together. Writing that glue code is not the cool thing, right? Like most devs, when they kind of look at like what they want to work on from an open source perspective, they're not thinking like, yeah, I want to write a bunch of glue code to integrate a bunch of tools I didn't write together. They're mostly thinking about, hey, I want to work on SigStore because I want to work on the future of signing. I want to work on I want to work on, this admission controller because it's like I'm protecting, Kubernetes. I want to work on this, and this. Whereas some of these other things, like, for example, Fresca, it's like, hey, if it was its own CI tool written in Go, Rust, Python, whatever, people might be a little bit more interested. But given that it's its own little thing, and it's like, it's like a set of things combined together, and it's all tied together with glue code, and it's like that sort of thing, which I totally get, is not the most for a lot of folks is not necessarily the most interesting thing. Anyway, before I move on, anybody have any thoughts on that? Agree, disagree?
Yeah, I would agree.
I
Like,
agree.
spend a lot of time on building Fresca. I mean, I agree in the sense that I don't find it, not that I don't find it not interesting. I mean, I do a lot of integration in my career, but yeah, I would agree that for a more senior dev, that may not be something that they want to spend time on.
I do think there are some genre of people that really enjoy this stuff, though. If you were to take this and present at like maybe like a DevOps days or something instead of a cloud native something, like you might have a ton of people that were super excited to get involved, and that's one of the difficulties with the cloud native community is it is heavily biased towards building, people who build new stuff, and they're less interested in, like, to me, this work is super important though, because it's like, no matter how cool SyncStore is, if you can't use it, if it doesn't integrate with all the other stuff out there, it's worthless. And so I think a lot of us represent companies or interests of, like, people want to use everything. Like, no matter what tool or integration we build, we'll go and take it to a customer and they will say, well, here's this other thing you've never heard of before. How does this fit in and how does this plug in? So I don't know, maybe we're all here because we're interested, but.
I think if we approach like the folks working more on like the infrastructure side, maybe, I mean, that's more, close to what the expertise are, right? Like, say a cluster admin, I mean, they're gonna work on like install various controller for various reasons, like, storage, load balancer, scaler, auto scaler, that kind of thing. And, deploying like a controller and, tying all these like secret management system together for like a secure build system, I think maybe closer, in that area versus like an application developer, really, from that perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I actually hadn't considered that, and I think that you brought up a good point there, John, about, hey, maybe bringing in a different audience into the conversation might help out as well. Because once again, my background is in that DevOps space, and so for me, I find this interesting. I find it challenging, and I find that some of the elements of it can be a bit frustrating. Like, for example, creating a generic enough interface into something like Fresca that most folks can just use it is an interesting challenge that often gets very frustrating because of the way that Kubernetes and a lot of those components work. But I think you bring up a very good point there, and it's probably worthwhile to reach out to some of those folks and see if we can show off some of this stuff. Because I do think one of the other things that was brought up at Cloud Native Security Con was a few folks reached out to me and they're just like, oh, you're doing stuff with, Fresca. And they asked me what Fresca was. And I said, oh, well, Fresca is stuff like it's Cert Manager and it's, Tecton and Tecton chains and it's Spiffy Spire that are integrated in together and yada, yada. And they said, oh, yeah, like that takes forever to set up. And I said, oh, well, we actually have it pretty well, at least with some of the stuff that we're building, and plus, obviously the make file, like at least from a dev perspective, it's actually pretty trivial to get spun up. It's not perfect, but it's pretty easy to get spun up. And they didn't believe me. They're like, it takes us so long to get, and I said, if you're talking about an existing environment, yes, integrating, let's say Fresca with your existing Spire is probably a headache. But if you're using a Spire specifically for Fresca, it's not that bad. If you're, if you're using a whole new cert manager and yada yada, it's not that bad. But a lot of folks, I think, weren't actually all that convinced because I think they are so used to the pain of trying to integrate all this stuff. So I also wonder at some point if it doesn't make sense to have a little bit of that flashy demo that, just to show, like, I get that with some of this, it's not the easiest because it's like, it takes 15 minutes to set up. Maybe we show off a demo and fast forward up to where we can start using it. But showing that, like, hey, here is, like, here's the make file, or here's a Helm chart, or here's, some script that can automatically install everything, I think would be useful. Cool. So yeah, so I have a follow-up to reach out to the DevOps Days folks, see if they would be interested in some of the stuff that we're doing with Fresca. One of the other follow-ups, which I'm still trying to figure out more from the TAC, is what is the status of the Sterling toolchain, and where are those conversations going to start to happen? So how can we be like this, the folks who are contributors and maintainers of Fresca? How can we get a bit more involved and see what we can do on that front? Because I once again, like, I don't want this to die on the vine if possible. And to be clear, it could just end up being like, hey, this is a reasonable example, and that's all it is, or it could be something that's a bit more, a bit more impactful to certain folks. And I'd be interested in kind of figuring some of that out. Once again, I think a lot of the feedback I've gotten from folks at places like CNSCon were that moving off, like, if it's a greenfield environment, and a few folks had reached out to me about greenfield environments, and they said, yeah, if it's a greenfield environment, Fresca is great, right? Because I get to just start using something new, and I can use this. If I already have 10,000 builds in Jenkins, how do I move off of those 10,000 builds? The thing that I found interesting, though, is in those conversations with folks, and these are folks mostly in very, very large banks, like Citi, but these are folks at other banks, as well as folks who work at very, very large organizations, some of them with 3 letters. And the folks who were there were also saying that for them, they have a big issue, which is also one of the common issues that Fresca is trying to solve, which is they have, let's say, a Jenkins. That Jenkins has 10,000 or several thousand jobs that are all manually configured in some way. Even if they are like Jenkins files, there are 10,000 Jenkins files. And anytime they have to go and say, okay, well, we have this new security scan that needs to be integrated. Great, now we need to change 10,000 Jenkins files. Whereas Fresca, right, is one of the things that's trying to say, no. You get to, via something like a framework, you'd be able to, the organization would be able to say, this is what is allowed, this is what is not allowed, and here is a security scan that needs to be run across all jobs, or here's a security scan that needs to be run across all jobs that are tagged with Go or Python, or that are tagged with, sensitive or whatever. I think those sorts of things are things that are still valuable, and I wonder if there are areas that we can still help enable those folks, or once again, I don't want us to get into the job of saying, hey, here's how you would move off of a Jenkins or whatever. I don't want to do that. But I do think that there might be some value there where it might be like, hey, we can't, let's say, help you out in all those places, but we can help you out with the secure piece, right? Where when you run your secure Jenkins step of like, I want to build, generate an SBOM, generate salsa, yada, yada. Great. We it calls out to something like a Fresca. Maybe that's valuable, maybe it's not, but I think it's worthwhile to reach out to a few folks. And I was going to reach out to a few of the folks from the CNSCon and see if they wanted to maybe join one of these meetings and kind of talk through some of their use cases, and we can kind of go through it. Okay. So that's that. And before getting to the KubeCon EU Security Village, one quick thing, because I forgot. I was talking to one of the Spire maintainers, who is working right now on doing so the work that Parth and Brendan Lum worked on for now over a year, trying to get some of that stuff integrated into getting Spire integrated into chains. There's some work that's actually been done from the other way. So to have Spire, so I should say to have chains integrate with Spire, so that chains can actually, attest to Spire and pull stuff out of, you know what I mean. There's one of the maintainers, Daniel, over at CNSCon, was talking about how they've been working on some stuff from the other way around of having Spire be able to provide credentials for change to use, as I believe that was the case, but to just sort of do it the other way around. Anyway, that seemed interesting, and they wanted to also maybe, once we have a better sort of thing there, like maybe in the fall or whatever, give a demo at KubeCon, showing off sort of integration, the two-way integration between chains and Spire into chains, so that we could use the secrets coming from the short-lived secrets coming from Spire, and then also show the other way around, to show that chains can sort of say, hey, I noticed that this build got compromised, yada yada.
So wait,
Oh.
Maybe I don't understand. Like, what does that mean? Other way around? Like, I don't get it, because I think some of the work that B-Mitch did also, like in terms of getting it, so it does get credentials so that it can authenticate into, like, let's say Vault or something.
Yeah. So this was different. I believe this is to give Spire, I don't remember if it was with something like a trusted timestamping service or what, but there was a way to sort of integrate the other way around. I'll have to ping David and Daniel and have him maybe talk a little bit about what they've been working on.
Okay.
Yeah, the way we were using in the past was as an identity service rather than an actual signing of the data service. And so there's a lot of different ways you can use the same ideas.
Yeah. What are they signing though? I guess at this point, as the chain said.
I'm not sure what they were doing on the chain side. I know when you were doing the attestations, you were signing the attestation server in the pipeline. So,
well, yeah, but I believe,
good
right, we're
questions.
signing that with the key, right? We're just using chains to integrate with Spire to sort of validate that the job, whether or not it's happened, we're not using the short-lived identity to actually sign. I believe, I'll have to check with Daniel. I believe he had some mechanism to actually make that possible. That you could use.
Doesn't that defeat the purpose of Spire in terms of the short-lived certificates that should be rotated? Like, well, that's why we don't use it for signing.
You can verify that it was signed by a particular identity at a particular time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'll have to ask Dan.
I think the other way you could take this, you could take Spire with its OIDC topology in there and use that with something like the SigStore design, where SigStore authenticates that you've got this Spire identity and uses that for pushing stuff up to Falsio and all that.
Yeah.
I think Witness might do that already, maybe.
Yeah, we're all playing the same space. We got 15 different implementations of the same idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think either way, I'll ask Daniel, because he's been working on some cool stuff with Spire. I'll ask him what that means, because once again, I'm not a Spire expert, so I might be misrepresenting what he told me, and I don't want to do that. Cool. So next up on the agenda is the KubeCon EU Security Village.
Yeah, so I put this on there. I don't know if anybody here is involved in that or not. Michael, I don't know if you are, but the idea, rather than having a co-located security day at KubeCon, is going to be this security village throughout the entire length of the conference, and have a dedicated space because of the size of the convention center, which is awesome. I was thinking that having some sort of like hands-on lab that would deal with Fresca would be super interesting to folks who are there. It's something that we could, from the sounds of it, mostly just run on people's laptops when they show up, and be able to kind of walk through it. I think it would be a great way to get some user feedback about this as well, of like a little bit like deeper conversations of what about this works for you, what about it doesn't work for you. And that could easily feed into something like the Sterling tool chain or something else. I'm also selfishly looking for a way to like to fund and justify my own trip there. So I'm very interested in what we could do to help out. I know the tag security folks are heavily involved in that. So
yeah, I can provide a little input there. And once again, this is where I've been pushing on OpenSSF and CNCF and the related orgs to be a bit more cooperative. The volunteers obviously are. I just know that I always find it funny that like, oh, OpenSSF has to pay for its own way to KubeCon, and stuff like that. So I know that. So there's a couple of follow-up talks, I believe, either later today or tomorrow. I'll have to check my schedule on some of the village stuff. So right now, the village, we have tag security has a reasonable amount of space in a big hallway between two major areas. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that space, but pretty much the space is kind of really spread out. It's almost like a college campus, a little bit. That's how like the conference center is set up. And so we're in a large, heavily trafficked area. And so there's a couple of things. One is tag security will have, their own track that they get to put on as they see fit. So that would be stuff mostly related to things like, the secure software factory reference architecture, which of course Fresca is an implementation of. There is a, stuff like the white paper and all that good stuff. And so then there is also going to be like a whole bunch of booths that they're setting up in a village, similar to something like DEF CON, or is it DEF CON or Black Hat? Whichever is the one that with the villages. They're going to have stuff set up like that. And the idea here would be that tag security can put on stuff like, larger scale things. So this is stuff like, hey, come join us as we hack into Kubernetes, or come join us as we show, like a hands-on demo of like preventing, attacks using an emission controller or those sorts of things. And so that's an area where something like Fresca could come in, right? I think that kind of probably makes a lot of sense. That's something I could probably bring up to the group, just sort of say, hey, we're doing this stuff with the secure software factory. If we're already going to be talking about that, it'd be great to be able to say, hey, it's not under the CNCF, but it's under the LF umbrella, this thing called Fresca. Would folks want to actually see how this works and how it's important and what sorts of things it does in a very hands-on way? And also, something that, based on what we currently have now with the Makefile and everything else, people can get this up and running on their local laptops as long as they have enough memory within, like 10 minutes or so, right? Which could be really cool. Yeah, thanks for the suggestion there.
And I don't know if the security village conversations already have enough folks or not, but I'm happy to join those calls if I can help.
Sure. I'll ask I guess I would just say feel free to go into tag security and just ask and say, hey, I hear there's a bunch of stuff with I hear there's a bunch of stuff with this, whatever, like are folks interested in more folk, whatever. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Also, as a reminder, so Open Source Summit, this call for papers is closed, but I believe soon Open SSF Days call for papers is going to open up. They just need to get the TAC to agree on something. I don't know what, but they need to get the TAC to agree on something, and then once they do, it'll that should go live. Anyway, anything else regarding the security village or anything else like that? Yeah, if there's nothing else, does anybody else have any other agenda items, anything else they wanted to bring up? Yeah, if there's nothing else, then I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, Michael. Get well soon.
Cheers.
Thanks. Later.